All right, so we are working on connecting our database, our MySQL database, to our .NET Core MVC application. So I have MAMP started up. I have MySQL Workbench so that we can see that this database holds 3 users. That's pretty much all this DB has. So how do we connect to our database? Do I have MySQL? I don't. So I need to add that as a dependency, right? Sure, let's do that. So I'm gonna Command Shift P or Control Shift P for you Windows users, and this brings up our command palette, so we can just type in whatever it is that we're looking for. What was it? Was it called NuGet Package Manager? Cool. So if we type in NuGet, you'll get these nice methods or whatever functions. We can click Add Package, and it's going to prompt us for the package name. It's called MySQL or something like that, so we can just type in that keyword, and it's mysql.data. Click that, and 707, you probably want the most recent version, which is M61. Success. Close that message, and of course, anytime you touch or change your CSproj file, you're going to want to restore. Right here. MySQL.data version 707 M61. Cool. So now we have MySQL, and we're just going to copy and paste this file, right? My dbconnection.cs. And we've already talked about what this file does in my other demo, so I won't go too in depth with this. It's the same exact file. dbconnector.cs. Going to paste this in. Testing 1, 2, 3. Cool. All right. So now I can console db is the name of my database. I'm on port 8889. My username and password, they're both roots. Cool. I think that's done. So now from my controller, views, home, index, I'm going to bring this up and my index page up. So Candyman generated a home controller for me, and I also have an index.cshtml in my home subdirectory in views. So if I .NET run, and we're up and running, localhost 5000. I will need, so I have my blank page up here, right? So here are all of my users. And what I'm going to want to do is what? Just get all my users. viewbag.users equals dbconnector.query for cool. So now in my viewbag.users, I can just do it this way. For each var user in at viewbag dot, was it users or all users? Users. Users, I am going to have a p tag. Oh man. That says at user and I'm accessing this dictionary's keys. Last name. Cool. So, what's wrong? Did I do something wrong? Object reference not set to an instance of an object. It is 8889. Sorry? I don't know. Oh, I just had to restart my server. That's weird. Oh, yeah. I don't think. I guess the watcher tool isn't built in. Yeah. Uh, maybe it is for your. I don't know. We'll check it out. Yeah. Anyways, for the purpose of this demo, yeah, I just had to restart my server. Cool. So I have all my users here now, right? Any questions on how I connected my DB or my MySQL database? Pretty straightforward, I'd say. If you guys are a little bit more curious about this dbconnector.cs file, that previous video that I posted about the MySQL CRUD assignment, I go in depth about everything that's going on in this file, so you can just fast forward through that video and find that 10-minute segment. But cool. So here, sorry. A database. So I'm not sure. Yeah. How does C# handle what? Well, your SQL is your connection to your SQL server is made directly through this IDB connection object right here. So you'll have some type of like what we call daemons or daemons running your SQL server on your remote server on your EC2 instance that will continuously have your server up and running, and that will connect to your server or your MySQL server, right? So your database and your actual application are not the same, right? They are not on the same server. MySQL is a different server that we are calling upon from our server. That makes sense. So they're not packaged like that together. Although this information is what allows my application to connect to my outside SQL server. Cool.
When you do your deployment, do you have to also upload your MySQL?
So I'm gonna stop the questions about deployment because we will for sure talk about deployment as we go forward. But since I'm recording, I don't want there to be a 20-minute deployment talk in the middle of my video. So moving forward, but I like the point that you guys brought up because all of this information lives directly in my dbconnector.cs file, right? So if I were, along with your guys' example, wanting to deploy this application, I do so by pushing to my GitHub, right? And then pulling all of those files from my GitHub into my EC2 instance, right? Kind of. So you use GitHub during deployment, right? The problem with that is that if I were to just push all of my files, all of these files up to GitHub, dbconnector.cs goes up along with it, and I have all of this sensitive information sitting right inside my GitHub. So anyone can go to my GitHub, poke through my files, look through all of my code, and know exactly what the name of my DB is, what my username is, and what my password is for that MySQL instance. Not good, right? So I need to obscure this information somehow. So how do I do that? If I git ignore this entire file, then I won't have access to any of these methods. But adding something to getignore is a part of it. Not quite.
Make it private.
So what we're gonna do is offload this sensitive information into a different file, and then getignore that file. Does that make sense? So, Matthew, you were kind of like 85% on the dot there. So we don't want to getignore this whole file, but what we're gonna do is move all of this information in a different file. And there are quite a few steps once we split those files up for our application to be able to find that information. So I'm going to go through that with you guys step by step by step. This securing SQL connection strings chapter, a lot of code in this chapter, but just step through it slowly, one step at a time, because that's exactly what I'm going to do for you guys to show you that if you just kind of refer to the platform, you guys will do just fine. So, if we were to push our project to GitHub, anyone who views our repo would know our connection username and password, making infiltrating our database much easier, kind of exactly what I talked about just a second ago. So, what we need to do is create a new file called appsettings.json. You can call it whatever you want, but it does need to be a JSON file. And inside appsettings.json, that is where we're going to unload all of our information. Cool. So it's called console DB. Cool. So now my information lives in this file, and I will be adding appsettings.json to my getignore file. So this file does not get pushed. Cool.
You just hated that file, right?
Yeah. No, but I will, for sure, yeah. Cool. So in order for our application to be able to look inside these JSON objects and pull information out of them, then I'm going to need a package called configure extensions. So we'll just use our CLI tools for this one. .NET add package. Great. There it is. Gonna restore. While that restores, let's refer back to the platform. And now we have to make a couple of adjustments to our startup.cs. What this allows us to do one second here. There's a couple of using statements I need. Cool. Is create this configuration object of iConfiguration that allows us to view inside our appsettings.json file and pull information out of it, right? So you can see that we're selecting our appsettings.json file here, and that's pretty much all that's constructor method of our startup class does. Cool. So once we have that set up, we need to add another service. Oops, forget that. And what this is going to do is it's going to grab those strings out of our JSON object and map them to our MySQL options class, which we haven't created yet, which is why this is saying that it doesn't exist. But you can see that we are getting the section called DB info. So if you look at our JSON object, this is the DB info, right? This is the key of DB info, so this is what we're pulling out of it, right? And we are mapping that information, key, name, value, MySQL connection string, key, connection string, all of this information stuff. We are mapping these two key pair values to an actual class called MySQL options. So I need to create a MySQL options class, and we have this for you right here. And by convention, this is just going to go in a directory called properties. It's just convention. but I am going to call this MySQL options.cs. Paste that guy right in there. Testing 1, 2, 3 shares the same namespace. So now if I go into my startup.cs, that should go away. Yes, it does. Cool. So now what I'm doing, again, just to reiterate what I said, was we are going to get the section of DB info from our app settings.json file, and we're going to map those key pair values to our MySQL options attributes. So if you look at app settings.json, it has name and connection string. If we look at MySQL options, it has public string name, public string connection string. Does that make sense? So what we're doing essentially is taking a JSON object and creating a C# class. Okay? Cool. So there is a lot of good reading here about what dependency injection is and how we're able to pull seemingly from thin air like magic certain classes into our application, which you guys will get a good taste of in a quick second here. Cool. So now what we're going to do is adjust our dbconnector.cs. We're going to get rid of all of this stuff because we don't want that in our on our GitHub. Instead, what we're going to do is you guys can see that your query method starts here, right? Which we already have. Everything above that we're going to need. Cool. So we have a couple of things going on here. We have a MySQL config object, which is typed to what? MySQL options, right? So this doesn't actually hold a MySQL options object in it yet. It's just a placeholder for where eventually a MySQL options object will get placed into, right? There's a couple of steps to setting a variable. There's variable declaration, and then there's variable setting, right? Just like in all languages, like JavaScript, Python, right? Cool. So I've declared a MySQL config placeholder, and in my DB connector constructor method, I am now passing in an actual config option, and I'm putting that config option into my placeholder. Now, where did this come from? I'm getting a MySQL options object, like, from seemingly out of nowhere, right? I'm just injecting it directly into my startup or into my constructor function. So we're allowed to do that because of dependency injection and because we've scoped it as a service to our application. Cool. So we have this config option, and we're setting it to this MySQL config private read-only variable up here. And what we're going to do is call on the MySQL connection instance, and we're going to get the value of the connection string within that MySQL config class. So do you guys remember what key pair of, or what attributes my MySQL config class had? It had name and connection string, right? So what we're going to do is get the value of this connection string, and we're going to give that as an argument to a new MySQL connection instance.
Wait, so could you go back to MySQL options?
Yeah.
Okay, and then that pulls from the JSON file?
Yes. So what we did in our startup.cs with our constructor method up here, I copy and pasted this chunk up here, is we've mapped our JSON object to our MySQL connection or MySQL config object.
And we just have to do it that way so that we can ignore the JSON object.
Yes.
But we still have the route there so that even when we deploy, we'll be able to go back.
Yes. Yeah.
So I'm kind of confused on that part. So if the JSON object is ignored and it's not pushed to Git,
Mm-hmm.
how does that line treat?
You will have to add that directly through your terminal using something like Vim or Nano. Yeah.
When you start spinning the server?
from your EC2 instance. So you're leapfrogging the GitHub step. Yeah. Cool. So MySQL connection, this new instance is going to take in that string, right? So if we take a look at, nope, not that one. My dbconnector.cs file that I had earlier. This is what I had earlier, right? Before I obscured all of this information. This portion here is pretty much the same. But instead of an actual string that I have directly in my file, I'm doing new MySQL connection, and I'm passing in the string that's being stored in my JSON object. Do you guys kind of see the parallels, at least? Cool. If you guys don't fully understand all the steps that I took, that's totally fine. If you do understand all the steps that I took, then that's very surprising because there's a lot of stuff happening here, and I'm moving pretty quickly. Cool. So now my DB connector is ready to go. If one quick thing, I have a couple of red lines here, right? That's because my methods are listed as static methods. Can someone refresh me on what static and non-static means?
Non-static methods have to be called from an instance of an
Ah, beautiful. Thank you, Corey. So non-static methods are called from the actual instance of a class. Does that make sense? So when I look at my home controller here, and I'm calling dbconnector.query, is dbconnector an instance of my dbconnector class, or is it the actual class itself? Right? So that's because this is a static method, right? If I make it non-static, which I do how? Just take this out, right? If I make it non-static, then what will I need to do to be able to use these query and execute methods? Yeah, create an instance of my DB connector class now and call those methods off of that instance. That's all static means. Cool. So, securing connection string. Great. So, what I'm going to do is add my actual DB connector class, this entire class, as a service. Cool. And again, all services do is it scopes it to your entire application. And the reason I'm doing this is so that I can just directly inject it into my controller. Sorry? Did just in your configure services method. So I'll show you real quick.
Right, but I know that when we were playing MVC, it had to be in a specific order.
Oh, I think in the using statements. Yeah, in your app.use statements here, it's good practice to have .use MVC last, because some use statements are dependent on app.use MVC. So it's good to have this last. As far as the adding services, that's irrelevant to how it's spun up. Yeah, cool. But I did add my DB connector as a service, so you can see now here, I can just inject my DB connector directly into my constructor method of my home controller. You see that these share the same names, right? So what happens when my home controller gets instantiated is that I pull a DB connector object and store it in this variable. Does that make sense? So can someone help me now fix this line of code?
It's _DB connector, right?
So change this, since I'm no longer calling it off of my class directly, since it's non-static, I need to call it off of my DB connector instance. Right? And that is it. So if I restart up my .NET application, hopefully nothing blows up. I will go to localhost 5000, and if I hit this route, I will still see those 3 names. And perfect. Yeah, sure. How do I add stuff in SQL again? Insert. Into. Users. Values. Oh, okay. How do I do that? Like this? Okay. First name. Do these need to be in strings? Last name. Fave. No. The values, if they're typed as strings, do need to be in strings, right? And I think they're single ticks. Who wants to get added to my database? Noel. Noel. Last name. What's your favorite number, Noel? 8? Kobe. Oh, okay. Got a Kobe fan. Cool. So now if I select all from users, I should have Noel last name 8 there. And if I refresh my page, there she is. Cool. So all of that work, right? All of that work just to obscure your DB connection information. But of course, that is very important information, right? For us, since we're in like development mode and we're in like a learning environment, my username is root and my password is root, right? If I'm building actual real applications, then of course I use a different username and password, right? Which I won't tell you guys what it is, and you guys won't find on my GitHub.
We ask nicely.
Maybe. Yeah. Cool. So I know I went through all of those steps really quickly, and maybe some of those steps made sense, but some didn't. There is a lot of explanation that happens at each step. So it's not just copy and paste. There's a lot of explanation that's provided with each step. Do spend some time reading it as you guys go through the securing a DB connection chapter, and spend some time talking about it with your neighbors, and try to figure out all of the different steps that are happening. But as you guys can see, I kind of just went top down and followed the instructions, and now I have a very secure SQL connection. Cool? All right, so I'm going to close